Good evening, Michigan. Welcome y'all back to another fabulous episode of Minds of Michigan. Tonight we have a special guest with us, Stephen Thomas, and he's going to be joining me as we talk to you guys about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, them being under constant attack in our country, and the ethics and the morality of where we seem to be heading to. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back. We appreciate you guys joining us tonight. Tonight we have a special guest with us, Stephen Thomas. He's going to be running for the Michigan House 82nd District in Michigan. And we're going to give him the floor for the first little bit here and let him tell you guys about some of his main points, some of his platform, and what you can expect out of him. Stephen?
Thank you, sir. Well, like you said, my name is Stephen Thomas. I'm running for the 82nd District Michigan House of Representatives for the 2022 election. Biggest thing for me and what has kind of driven my passion to run is seeing kind of what has happened to the state and seeing the sort of authoritarian policies that have come out over the last year. And it's always been a thought in the back of my mind that I should run, because anybody who is not happy with how things are running should run for office and should get in, because if you want to make a change, that's truly the way to do it. So that's kind of what has driven my passion to run. And the biggest thing for me is I see that our legislature currently and our governor is, while they all talk a big game during their campaigns, when it comes down to this is for you, these are your decisions, we want to act on your behalf, they don't do it once they get in the office. They say all these things to get in and don't ever stick to their promises that they make on the campaign trail. So I'm a political outsider. I've never held office. I've never held local office even. So I've decided that I'm going to run for the House to start and really make a positive change for the people of my district and for the people of Michigan, and really truly put people over politics and listen to what the people have to say, and what they want.
Absolutely, and that's how we should be living our government all the time. People have to realize that our government is unique in the sense that the power truly does reside in the people. Now, to what degree we decide our voices are being heard, that's called consent to be governed. And that's why we have our elections every 2, 4, 6 years, is for that very reason. And if you don't feel like you're being truly represented, if you feel like your ideals aren't truly being put out there and the things that you need and want out of life and out of our country and out of our state, that's what our elections are for. That is your consent to be governed. And if you disagree with anything that's going on from your local level to state level to a federal level, that's the only way to make a change, is to either be in the fight yourself or to support the ones that you know are in the fight for you. So
Exactly.
and I try to reiterate it all the time because it is just absolutely so important, because voices on the regular, and we're going to talk about that here shortly with the First Amendment, and it seems to be a specific group anymore in our nation, is constantly silenced. And this has been a growing problem since about 1964 is when it started. 1984 is when it became a really bad problem. But we're going to hold off on that just for a minute. We're going to play the video first, and then me and Steven afterward are going to reiterate and talk about it a little bit more.
I'll say my name, free speech. My parents, reason and toleration, raised me to seek truth and bear disagreement. Growing up, I traveled on waves of air and then seas of ink. I was a poet, a scholar, a scientist, a businessman, a prankster, and a heretic. I made new friends, but I also met my greatest enemy. His name was the Silencer. He said I was dangerous and convinced rulers to restrict me by any means necessary. Conform, agree, accept. Instead, I escaped. I came to America, where people enshrined my right to exist in the First Amendment. We protected the right to innovate, assemble, dissent, to love, and even to hate. Together, we launched a new renaissance, building the greatest, wealthiest society in the history of the world. We created universities where students fearlessly debated radio, film, and television. We even went to the moon. So long, Silencer. Or so I thought. The Silencer found a powerful ally. Her name was victimhood. Together, they took the failed economic theory of Marxism and refangled it with identity politics, replacing class struggle with sex and race grievances. Its new name? Postmodernism. They infiltrated universities, where I used to roam free, and pinned me up with speech codes in speech zones. They infiltrated news media, where I once gave people the freedom to dissent. They infiltrated social media, where I once reigned supreme, and replaced the tyranny of government with the tyranny of the mob. The Silencer's methods and allies may have changed, foregoing religious dogma for political correctness, but the message remains the same. Conform, agree, accept. There was one woman who would not conform. Her name was Ayn Rand. She said, "Evil ideas are dangerous only by the default of men advocating better ideas." It's not always easy to speak up against evil ideas, against the threat of being reviled or even real violence. It takes moral courage, conviction, and a commitment to bear the consequences of pursuing truth.
And the reason I chose this video for what we were talking about tonight is because I couldn't find a more perfect representation of the growth of where we're supposed to be at with our rights and our freedom, and where we're at currently with the oppressiveness of free speech that, like I said, that really started in 1964 with the FCC pushing for certain ideologies to be put above others. But in 1984, when that became a success, when the FCC eliminated the fairness doctrine, that's when all of our problems started. Because up until that point, if you wanted, let's say you wanted to have me or Steven on your show, you would also have to give the likes of people like Dan Kildee and Nancy Pelosi the same opportunity and the same amount of airtime to rebuttal on that fact. If you gave us 5 minutes, you had to give them 5 minutes on the same exact show. When they did away with that, that is about 80% of our problem currently today. Because, like I've said in prior episodes, that's what you ingest on a daily basis, over and over and over and over. And when you're only seeing one side of the story, and one side of the story only has to legally be portrayed anymore, that's all you're going to get. Unless you go out and, like I also encourage all of you all the time, unless you go out and you dig into these things yourself and you look at these things yourself, You're never going to see those. If you brush by and you just go through the headlines and you just take that 10 to 15 seconds to go through the headlines of what you're supposed to see in the actual girth of the article, what you're actually supposed to look into, and do your own research and make up your own mind. That's why we have our own minds. That's why we have our own free will, is to not have to bend in either direction to anybody, whether it be left or right. In that sense, we're all the same. We all have the same capability to think for ourselves, and more, we're letting them take that from us, and we're bending over and we're accepting these things. And it's time we stop, because if we let them take our free speech away, then our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, 10 generations down the line, they will never be able to stand up to this. They will never be able to speak out against this. If they do, God knows what will be able to happen to them. They might be jailed. There might be capital punishment for speaking out against such things against our government by that point. These are the directions with these rewritings and rewordings and the political correctness. There's standard bylaws now over in the UK that you can be jailed for hate speech or what they deem as hate speech. These things can happen. It's just a matter of the push behind them. And right now, their push is incredible. Because you see it all over the media every day. You see it all over the newspapers. You see it all over our phones, all over our social medias. And you only see one side of the story. Voices like ours never get to be heard on the situation. That's part of the reason why I have a show the way I do. Now, I'm sure that the way Facebook likes me, at some point they'll get tired of what I have to say, or people like Steven or Ryan Kelly have to say, and that might not be a thing in another year. We'll see on that. But you'll never see us falter. You'll never see us stop saying what we want to say to you guys, because this is one of the only ways that we can say it to you, and for you to know that it's directly coming from us without somebody pushing us in the back. Is there anything that you might like to add on this topic, Stephen?
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of tweaking out on my
end. Yeah, there's kind of a delay there.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point, and I was going to say something about that. Like, we don't realize in this country exactly how good we have it when it comes to free speech, because there are literally countries out there that you cannot speak up in against the government, and if you do, you will get killed, you will get jailed, you will be punished somehow. And I think we don't realize exactly how good we have it. The fact that we can say whatever we want, essentially, you just get, it's all about, it kind of brings it into our whole conversation here, is it's kind of comes down to morality standpoint, but at the same time is you can technically say whatever you want in this country. We have the freedom to do that. Another thing you brought up was, talking about hate speech, and I specifically remember I never heard the term hate speech as so openly used as it is today. And it was probably I'd say around 2014, 2015, when I started hearing it being used more and more and more. And there's an artist by the name of Tom McDonald, and he says there in one of his songs, and he brings up a very good point. There's a difference between hate speech and speech that you hate.
I was going to say that.
Sorry, I took it from you. But it's true, because just because somebody says something that you don't believe in, that you don't agree with, that doesn't make it hate speech. But because and I'm just going to come out and say it, because the radical left is pushing so hard to say that all of these things are hate speech when you don't agree with us, when you don't see things eye to eye with us, that is forcing people to say, okay, yes, this is hate speech. I could say, hey man, I really don't like your choice of shirt. Freedom of speech says I can say that, but you could come out and say, "Oh, I don't like this Stephen Thomas guy. That's hate speech." Blah blah blah. It's so simple as that. Just little things like that that you can just openly say this is hate speech, and all of a sudden there's a whole movement against telling people that their shirt sucks. And you're absolutely right. It all comes down to the political correctness that they all of a sudden seem to start to um, really push on, and really focus on being politically correct. Well, why? And maybe this isn't something new. I mean, I just got heavy into politics probably 8 years ago, so maybe it's not a terribly new concept. But the point I'm trying to make here is not everything is hate speech. We have the freedom to say the things that we want. And unfortunately, with the rise of social media, specifically because that's where we do 90% of all of our communicating anymore is social media, and them having the freedom now to essentially silence those that they don't agree with, it's becoming an even bigger issue, and that is trampling on our First Amendment rights. And that is something that we need to focus on getting rid of so that they can, or so that they, I'm sorry, so they don't have the power to change different points of view. Because you're right, we do have the mental capacity for free thought, and that's where I think this country is kind of going down the tubes. Is people are led to believe by the media and by social media that they don't have, they're not allowed to have a different opinion. Sorry, I'm speaking faster than my brain can keep up right now. Um, but we're indoctrinating people into thinking that they don't get an opinion, that it's my way or the highway. You have to think this way. Well, no, there's still a whole group of us, and I would say probably 78 million roughly, um, that realize that free thought is a real thing. And if people would just step back and do their own research and not just take everything that the media has to tell them and everything they see on Facebook has to tell them as the gospel, maybe more people would see that, oh, wait a second, hold on. No, the media is actually lying to us because they want us to think a certain way.
Right, yeah, and I had covered that in the past episode. When you look at the fact that, and this is complete true fact, I try to reiterate when things are absolute fact for people. There's 5 major media corporations, and when you look at all the CEOs of those corporations, they are all Democrats. So when people say the media is controlled by Democrats, and people look at them and tell them that they're crazy or that they don't know what they're talking about, or whatever the case may be, that's actually true. And that's one thing that people have to realize, is that it is a complete fact. Like I've said before, other than a select few Newsmax, OANN, stations like that, networks like that, all of these networks are controlled, or the CEOs and the people that run these networks are all Democrats. And for people to want to deny, at least acknowledge that fact, because that's going to prepare you for anything that's going to come after that. When you go to do research on a subject, you're going to know what sources you want to go to and what ones you want to avoid automatically, because you're automatically going to know that bias is there. But it also doesn't help that we know, like the video stated, we know how college and universities tend to be, and a lot of times are. They are very liberal in their teachings and how they are structured. And when we have students that spend anywhere from 4 to, when some get their doctorates, 16 years in these facilities and in these places, there's not a whole lot else that you can expect when they come out the other end of this situation. When, like you said, when they've been stemmed by either their professors or the majority of people around them, so they've decided to blend in and accept things. Whatever the case may be, when they come out of that situation, it's hard for people to still hold on to conservatism when there's all that constant bombardment around them all the time. And I think that's another part of the problem of where we get such a big attack on the First Amendment, is because all these younger people, and now, mind you, me and Steven here are both 30. We're on the slightly lower side of that spectrum. There's people in college and university getting their doctorate, like I stated before, that are the same age and older than us. But that's where you get a lot of these, what are they called? Gen Z and Gen X and, all these different generations. That's where you get a lot of these ideals from. It's because a lot of these ideals, and I'm not saying specifically or just from that, but a lot of these ideals and a lot of these ways of thinking come out of our colleges and they come out of our universities. And that's one of the most alarming things about it, is because no matter, politics are meant for Capitol Hill, or politics are meant for your local chamber or your state chamber. That's where politics are made for. They're not made to be splayed out into the fabric of our society. No matter if you are a representative speaking to your people or speaking to a crowd of people, you should not be inciting them in any way, shape, or form. Yes, you have your right to free speech under the First Amendment, as we've stated here. But you should not be teaching them with the right of your First Amendment, especially if you're a representative of ours, Maxine Waters. Especially if you're a representative of ours, you should not be using your First Amendment right in that fashion. Like we said, you have the right to say whatever you want. But doing something like that is a bad idea. And that's using your First Amendment right in the wrong capacity. That would be no different than me going to an airport and yelling the B word out loud. That would be absolutely no different. I have the right to do that, but is it a good idea? Probably not. So I wouldn't do something like that. But the reason I wanted to bring that up is because these people, they want to go out into the streets, and whether it be Antifa, whether it's an ideal or not, or whether it be these huge mobs of people or these BLM groups that are acting like they're BLM, but they're actually just riots in disguise. What about on their end? So now you've treated us like we don't have a voice and that we should be silenced. But on the flip side of that coin, you're saying and bailing out the people that you say have a voice in this country, as opposed to us, while they're burning down our cities, while they're destroying and looting and rioting. You want to silence us, and you want to encourage these people that are actually putting the destruction of America. And that's part of people's problem with you. That is part of people's problem with you, is because you're not holding everybody in our nation to the same standard. If anything, you're intensifying the divide that people already feel amongst themselves. And you're doing it all with your First Amendment that you want to try to deny to us. The other side of that is big media corporations like Facebook, Twitter, Google, a little bit in there, YouTube. You can't search my channel on YouTube. You're not going to find it. If you follow my page here on Facebook, you're going to get set to highlights at first. If someone gets over 25 likes, then you might see it. But these are another form. And I guess the term now for this type of situation is shadow banning by YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And I've been 4 months into this. I've registered my driver's license with Facebook to be able to do the political things that I'm doing. They know my address. They know back history that's in my work history and in my relatives. They have been in just about every single aspect of my life that you could think of. Facebook. not the FCC, not for me to file to be a candidate for this race or anything to that nature. Facebook. On top of having all that information, I have now had 3 posts deleted with no explanation except for one, which was completely, utterly an unacceptable reason, was completely off target. But the other 2, no reason, no email sent to me, no notification of why they took it down. And mind you, they didn't delete my words. They did not delete my words, but the posts to go along with my words were gone, which to me is the same form of censorship. It's the same form of silencing. Things like this have to stop. And when people in our house have stakes in these places that want to silence our First Amendment, these people deserve to be shown to the public who is aiding and abetting these companies in silencing our voices. Because they need to go too. Because if you're going to violate one of the fundamental rights of our Constitution, our First Amendment, our right to free speech, the right to assemble, the freedom of religion, if you're going to violate that first staple right, then you definitely need to leave. You definitely need to vacate that seat because you definitely don't belong there. These are the type of things that we're talking about. People that are not going to uphold our rights, people that are not going to uphold our freedoms and our liberties. You are going. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's giving you the news flash, but we're tired of it. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter how long it takes us to have people stand up, wherever it takes them to stand up. We're done giving up our rights. We're done, especially our right to free speech. And then half the time when we have our free speech, we get turned around to be called racist or bigots or whatever the case may be. And meanwhile, with their First Amendment right, Coca-Cola is allowed to give you a training video that tells you how to be less white. So, in that situation, not only do you have the double standard on that we're racist and we're bigots, but once again, you have the double standard on free speech. If a person like me or Steven were to say something like that, to try to tell a person of color something to that nature, it would be the end of everything. The absolute end of everything. We would never, not only would we never have a chance in politics ever, but we would probably have things done to our houses and people on the street and, you know, so many things. And the only reason I assume these things or that I say these things is because these are the things that has happened to people like us. People have had their houses stalked. People have been followed. People have had death threats. And all because of their First Amendment right. All because they had the freedom to say what they wanted to. And somebody wanted to, as Steven said earlier, hate speech and speech that you hate. And somebody always wants to take that and do that with it. But it never happens on the other side. Somebody's always defended. Somebody always jumps up and says, nope, you did it. Or they turn it around and try to put it onto a situation on our side. But people that truly know, it doesn't work like that. People that truly know what's going on right now understand the censorship and understand how much our First Amendment is under attack. People like you that are seeing us right now. That's why you're watching this. Is because you know that these things are happening in our country. Whether it be